Hi everyone, Sam Pearson here. Let me start with a story. So before I landed a job as a games designer at Games Workshop, I created something called Hinterlands. This was back in the early days of Age of Sigmar, although not quite the true Wild West because it was after the first General's Handbook, so at least we had points, but it was way before Warcry and even before Warhammer Skirmish. Hinterlands was a skirmish game mode for Age of Sigmar, so instead of controlling armies, you controlled just a single warband of about a dozen models, and they moved and acted as individuals on the battlefield. One thing that amazes me is 10 years later, I still get comments about Hinterlands on my YouTube videos. I'm not going to lie, it makes me feel very warm inside that people look back on that rule set fondly. But it was hardly revolutionary in my opinion. It was really just me taking rules from my favourite games, Necromunda and Mordheim, and streamlining them down to 4 pages, which was a challenge I set myself to mirror the 4-page rules that Age of Sigmar had at the time. It has bits of my own flair too, things like the underdog system, which gave bonuses on the actual battle rather than just in the campaign aftermath like with traditional Necromunda. And that would be an idea that I revisited recently in Spearhead with the underdog systems and the negative feedback loops that I deployed there. But while those who remember Hinterlands will probably remember it looking like this, there was a time when it looked like this. I posted a draft of the rules looking like this up onto the Age of Sigmar forum, TGA, the Grand Alliance, and I got some responses, some very useful responses actually, because one thing I was struggling with in particular was how to translate Battleshock mechanics to this small scale. Battleshock being the system Age of Sigmar had at the time to represent models fleeing the battlefield, and I was tripping over myself creating all sorts of these convoluted mechanics to try and recreate it in Hinterlands. But for everyone who engaged with that early draft, no one was excited to play it as a game. That changed when I gave Hinterlands a proper release a few months later. Now, the game's design had certainly improved. The solution to that Battleshock problem, by the way, was just to get rid of it. No tears were shed. But more importantly, the presentation of the rules allowed for fellow hobbyists to start treating it like a game. All of a sudden, people were getting excited by the rules, eager to try them out. I heard reports of people playing games with their friends, playing at their local gaming club, even hosting events and tournaments. There was talk on Twitter, on forums, and then it caught the eyes of people in the studio, and it made a core part of my application that landed me a job there. So I think as much as the game's design was important, so too was the presentation. Players engaged with Hinterlands like a game because it looked like a game. It was a game to them. So in this video, which is the final in my Games Design 101 mini-series, we're going to take a game idea from its initial draft all the way through to its finished PDF, fancy graphics and all. And I'm going to show you all of the steps that I followed to create it. And you might think it's strange to have a video in a series on Games Design 101 focused on graphic design, really. But the truth is, like with Hinterlands, until you start laying out your rules in a professional way, your aspirations of becoming a games designer are always going to remain a pipe dream. Turning those drafts into finished PDFs is turning that dream into reality. You could have a Google Drive filled with tons of great ideas, but they are not really games until you make something that can be interacted with as a game by a player. And that's either a print-ready file to be turned into a book or a PDF that can be downloaded. Luckily for us, those are the same thing. You use print-ready files either to send to the printers and turn into a book or to turn into a digital PDF ready to download. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to make print-ready files. But this video is not just going to be about graphic design. It's going to be crammed full of games design too. We're going to be designing a fun and thematic narrative campaign between my 2 favourite 40k armies, the Blood Angels and the Tyranids. And I'm going to talk you through the decision-making process there too, including trying to answer a question I posed in the first video of this series. In that video, I said I wanted to play in a narrative campaign where I, the player, got the chance to call down Exterminatus. I got to push that big red button and I would have to live with the consequences. So that's what we're going to try and do today. We're going to try and make Exterminatus a feature of this campaign, and you can be the judge of how successful I pulled that off. I'll see you after the jump. Right, let me start by telling you the tools that we're going to be using. And quickly, I will say that we're not going to be using any AI tools in this video. We're going to be making everything by hand ourselves. The big tool that we need is a computer program called Affinity by Canva. There is a download link in the description below. This program is quite remarkable because it's the equivalent of Adobe InDesign, which is the industry standard for creating gamebooks. And up until about 2 weeks ago, Affinity was a program you had to buy. But they've just changed strategy and it's now 100% free to use. At least for our purposes, there is a paid for tier and that's to unlock some new AI functionality, but we won't need that for this video. So it's free for us, and what makes this program very exciting is it's not just the equivalent of Adobe InDesign, it is also the equivalent of Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. And these are really the three programs that you would need normally to create a gamebook. Adobe InDesign would be used for the layout, Adobe Illustrator would be used for making icons, something which is called a vector, and Adobe Photoshop would be used for making all the graphics and art assets. So the three programs you need are all rolled into one, Affinity, and you can just seamlessly switch between them by going between the publisher, vector, and pixel modes. Like I said, up until 2 weeks ago, you had to pay for this program, and in fact, it was 3 separate programs called Affinity Publisher, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Photo. You might have heard of them before. The only downside to this recent change is there's no app support at the moment. The 3 older apps have been retired from the App Store. I still have them on my trusty iPad, but you'll have to use a PC or Mac to use Affinity right now. The other tool I'm going to be using in this video, which is optional, is an iPad Pro with a stylus, an Apple Pencil Pro, and the app Procreate. Now, Procreate itself is incredibly affordable. It is currently $12.99 on the UK App Store, but of course an iPad Pro is expensive. Worth it in my opinion. This is beyond the scope of this video, but I've been using it and Procreate to teach myself to draw over the past few months. This skeleton warrior chap that I use as my transition screen and logo is something I drew myself after practicing art for 100 days. Here is a quick time lapse of me creating it. But like I said, the iPad and Procreate are both optional. All of the steps that we're going to be doing in Procreate could be done inside Affinity in its pixel mode instead. Right, let's get designing. So this is a 2-player narrative campaign between the Blood Angels and the Tyranids. Why? Simply because they are my 2 favourite factions. I have big armies of each. Here is a picture of some of my Blood Angels, and here are some of my Tyranids, which is an extension of my Genestealer cult army. I plan to rope in a gaming friend to play through this campaign with me. The campaign is going to use the 3 location dilemma, which is a structure I outlined in the last video. To quickly recap how it works, it's played over 2 phases. The second phase is simply the final battle to decide the overall winner, while the first phase is a build-up where multiple battles are fought over different locations. Rather than cycling through the locations in a fixed order, players instead get to pick which location is fought over each battle, and to make this an exciting decision, one full of drama, they will be presented with a dilemma, and that dilemma is every location has a different reward on offer, and each player will have a pool of resources they need to allocate in secret to try and outsmart their opponent and gain the reward they want. What those rewards and resources are is up to you, the designer, and they can be anything really, but a good place to start is thinking about what emotions do you want to evoke in the players as they're playing through your campaign. For example, in the last video I outlined a campaign using this structure between the Imperial Guard and the Orcs, and I mentioned a few times I wanted the players to feel like World War II generals. Establishing how I wanted the players to feel gave me lots of guidance in what the rewards and resources should be. So I made the rewards things like getting a free tank for securing the tank factorum, and I made the resources dispatching armies of varying sizes, 1400, 1500 and 1600 in points, and choosing a plan of attack for each of them, blitz, hold or flank. And I put together a simple matrix to determine who gained the upper hand from each plan of attack. By the way, if you haven't seen the second video in the series yet, there will be a link to it at the end of this one, and that goes into much more detail about how to structure a 3-location dilemma. This time around, I want to evoke different feelings in the players. I don't want it to feel like a battle of equals where each is trying to outmaneuver the other. One of the overarching themes of the Tyranids is how hopeless it is to face off against them. So what emotions do I want to evoke in the players this time? Well, for the Tyranid player, I want them to feel like the hive mind. And for me, that is this vast alien intellect, unknowable in the truest sense, cold and calculating, who schemes and plays out strategy on a galactic scale. For the Blood Angels, well, for me, the Blood Angels are noble and tragic in equal measure, but also in the modern lore, they are abandoned, forgotten about in the Imperium Nihilus, and beset on all sides, trying to hold back an unstoppable horde. So I want to bring these tragic elements to the forefront here. I don't want them to feel like they can claim a decisive victory over the Tyranids. I want the situation to feel kind of hopeless, where only a Pyrrhic victory is the best they can achieve, and they must make difficult choices in the face of overwhelming odds. Lastly, I know I want the campaign to be fought over the control of planets. Now, Tyranids themselves don't hold territory. They devour it and move on. So the Tyranids will be on the offense, while the Blood Angels are trying to hold them back. So those are all the ingredients to throw into the cooking pot. And here's the campaign I came up with. The campaign is called Shadows over Ornamentum, a nod back to Shadows over Bogenhafen from old school Wuthra or Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. The campaign takes place across an area of Imperial space called Subsystem Ornamentum. There are 6 planets in total, and the most important planet is Ornamentum Prime, which is where the final battle will be fought. The first phase of the campaign is fought over the remaining 5 planets. These are the planets that lie between Ornamentum Prime and the encroaching Hive Fleets. I made each of these planets a different type of planet from the lore: a shrine world, an agri world, an industrial world, a penal world, and a mining world. This increase from 3 to 5 locations gives me room to include Exterminatus as a mechanic. The Blood Angels are going to get the chance to blow up one of the planets, and it also gives me some room to really drive home this feeling of hopelessness for the Blood Angels in another way too. Let me explain. So the Tyranids are going to be the attackers in this campaign, choosing in which order the planets will be attacked. The Blood Angels, on the other hand, will be manning the defense, and to make this feel hopeless for them, I'm going to give the Blood Angels 4 armies to dispatch to the defense, but as there are 5 planets, they're going to have to leave 1 planet undefended, left to its fate. And if the Tyranid player attacks it, well, it's game over, man.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
It's just a small thing, but I think elements like this can really help drive home the emotions you want players to feel. Now, each of the 4 armies the Blood Angels have are of varying size, so this is their resource. They'll dispatch the stronger armies to some of the planets and their weaker armies to the others. And to make that decision, they'll want to look at the rewards each location offers, which we'll get into in just a moment. On to the Tyranids. They are the attackers and get to pick in which order the planets are attacked in. I said before, I want them to feel like a grand strategist, the hive mind itself. And to do this, instead of letting them pick after each battle, they need to decide the entire order in secret before the first phase begins, in the mechanic I christen the Hive Fleet's approach. Because they are picking the order at the start, rather than having armies of varying sizes like the Blood Angels, instead their army will grow in size after every battle, win or lose. So the first planet attacked in the Hive Fleet's approach will be by a force of 1300 points, and from there it's going to grow 100 points after every battle. This should make the Tyranid player feel like they are controlling one of those tendrils of the Hive Fleet that grows ever larger as it delves into the subsystem. Okay, so the campaign is coming together now, but we need to turn this into a dilemma. How does the Blood Angels player choose which planet to guard with their larger armies and which to guard with their smaller armies? And how do they choose which planet they're going to leave undefended? And for the Tyranid player, how can they guess the Blood Angels player's actions right now? And to make that dilemma, what we need to do is give each planet some information, and we also need to assign it a reward. For the first step, I create a fixed scenario for each planet using the deployment and primary missions from the Leviathan mission deck that came in the 10th edition launch set. Now, despite the name of this deck, Leviathan, there is nothing overtly Tyranid in the theme when it comes to the cards. And as I mentioned in my last video, I am not a massive fan of the secondary missions and the extra mission rules too. So I leave out those and I create my own twists for each battle, ones that are themed for the type of planet they are fighting over. One neat trick you can do here in a fixed framework like this is I made one of of those twists benefit the Blood Angels player, and one at another location benefit the Tyranid player. What this can do is add an additional layer of nuance to the dilemma by creating avenues for the players to bluff against one another. I also attach a reward to each location as the framework suggests, but because the Blood Angels and the Tyranids fight over completely different things, I make each of these a reward to the Blood Angels player only in the case of victory. Right, this gives us everything we need for the dilemma. The Blood Angels player has 4 armies of varying sizes that they must dispatch to the different planets, based on the scenario it has and the reward on offer. In addition, they must leave 1 planet undefended. The Tyranid player takes that same information and tries to strike the locations in a favourable order. As their army size grows after each battle, the best case for them is to strike the undefended planet first, as that will increase their army in size for the rest of the campaign. So here the core of the dilemma is, can the Tyranid player successfully predict where the Blood Angels player will leave undefended, or will the Sons of Sanguinius be able to call their bluff? I am going to give a glimmer of hope to the Blood Angels player too. If the undefended planet comes last in the Hive Fleet's approach, i.e. the first 4 battles are fought over all the defended planets, then I will say that they have successfully diverted the Hive Fleets away from the undefended planet and count it as a win on their side instead. Unlikely, but still possible. Right, so there's the locations and the dilemma mapped out for the first phase, but there are a few extra additions I still want to add. The first is some rewards for the Tyranids. These don't need to be tied to the locations per se, because we already have a good dilemma to tax the players with, so instead I give the Tyranids a fixed reward. Each time they win a battle, they get 2 benefits. The first is they get to pick a unit in their army and give it a biomorph. I love the idea of biomorphs and rapid evolution with the Tyranids, and so I put together a table of them. Because this is a narrative campaign, I err on the side of fun and explicitly state the same unit can gain multiple biomorphs over the course of the campaign because, well, that just sounds cool to me. To quickly add here about the actual line-by-line writing of these mechanics, the best approach, no matter the game you are designing for, is to use a technique called templating. Templating is where you look through the existing rules of a game, such as the core rules, and you find an existing turn of phrase that is as close a match as possible to what you want, and you use that wording as the basis for your own. For example, when writing these biomorphs for my Tyranids, I went straight to the battle honours in the Crusade section of the Tyranid Codex and used the wordings from there as my starting point, changing the effects to the ones I desired. I'm going to give the Tyranids a second reward for each victory too. I'm going to give them something I'm calling a reinforcement point. As well as gaining a biomorph, for each victory the Tyranid player gains 1 reinforcement point, which is a little pool of finite points they can spend later in the campaign, either in a later battle in the first phase or saving them up for the final battle. These points are spent to return a destroyed unit to the battlefield. I'm adding this second layer because I'm conscious that the Tyranid player currently does all of their decision making right at the very start of the campaign, where they plot out the hive mind's approach. And I want to give them something interesting to think about as the campaign progresses too. As I always quote, Sid Meier said, games are a series of interesting choices. So let's give the Tyranid player something to think about during the campaign. They accrue these reinforcement points and then they decide when to spend them. Another thing I am conscious about with this design is a possible problem with armies of varying sizes battling each other. In the last video I had armies of varying sizes too, but the variance there was never greater than 150 points. Here there is a chance for greater variance, a few hundred points in either direction, so I want to see if I can soften that slightly. I like to think of real-world considerations and take those into account if possible. I think one advantage a smaller force might have over a larger force is mobility, so I try to add something to that effect for each army. For the Blood Angels player, I give their 2 smaller forces the following rule: rapid deployment. The Blood Angels start the battle with 1 additional command point. While for the Tyranids, I add a rule that keys off the Vanguard keyword, and I give them the following: Vanguard Invasion. Add 1 to the objective control characteristic of Vanguard Invader units. That should hopefully encourage the Tyranid player to field lots of Vanguard organisms in those early battles too, and make the forces feel themed. Right, one last thing to add, and that is Exterminatus, but I need to be careful here because it could break the balance of the dilemma. When adding an extra mechanic like this to the framework, one that is a decision made by one of the players, be it Exterminatus, calling an Orc War, or awakening a Tomb World, there are a few different ways you can pull it it off. A common trick you can pull is having an ability that grows in power the longer you don't use it. That could be the case with, say, the Orc War. Perhaps after each battle in the campaign, the effect becomes more and more potent, and this gives the player a dilemma as to if they should wait for it to grow in power or use the ability now and gain an advantage. Another trick is requiring the player to amass a certain amount of points before they can do something. In the case of Awakening a Tomb World, perhaps the Necron player gets 2d6 awakening points for every victory and needs a certain amount before they can trigger the ability. For Exterminatus, however, I want this to be a choice as to if the Blood Angels player even uses it at all. So I think the best sort of dilemma to use here is the trade-off. I want this to have both an upside and a downside, and to make them question if they should even use it at all, I think the downsides need to be very strong. So this is what I came up with. Exterminatus Protocol. In times of terrible need, Imperial commanders can order the Exterminatus Protocol, sentencing a planet and its populace to death to set back the enemy advance. Once per campaign, when the next world to be attacked has been revealed. If it is a defended world, the Blood Angels can declare Exterminatus Protocol. If they do so, the defending force is quickly evacuated, but there is no time to evacuate the general populace before the battleships and strike cruisers begin their orbital bombardment. If Exterminatus Protocol is declared, the following happens. The battle immediately ends. Neither the Blood Angels or the Tyranids earn a victory. Until the Blood Angels next earns a victory, they suffer from the following rule. A terrible cost. This is the chapter's darkest hour, and until they can absolve their sins through victory, a shadow is cast upon them. Subtract 3 from Battleshock tests made for Blood Angels units. I didn't allow the player to unleash Exterminatus on the undefended planet because I think that throws off the dilemma completely. Also, narratively, when a Space Marine chapter unleashes Exterminatus on a planet, it is the ships of their fleet dropping a nuclear payload from orbit, and they cannot do that if they're not there, so it has to be one of the defended planets. The downsides are strong, so I think the Blood Angels player would only use this if they find themselves hopelessly outnumbered in one of the battles, which seems fitting for me, as I think this would be the only case in which a Space Marine commander like Dante of the Blood Angels would consider it. The situation needs to be dire. So that's the first phase of the campaign designed. The last thing to do is to design the second phase, which is the final battle. Now, scenario design is a massive topic, and I hope to be able to do a wider video on it at some point, but for now, let me just talk you through the mission that I designed for the final battle and take you through some of the aspects of its design. The first thing I decided is that the Blood Angels should be the ones to deploy first, because in this instance, it simulates to me the invasion of the planet. The Blood Angels are waiting, and then the Tyranids land from orbit. Now, you could do this with elaborate mechanics of the Tyranids arriving mid-battle, and that would be cool, but you can also get this feeling across with simpler mechanics too, and that's what I wanted to convey to you here. It's your call to make ultimately as the designer, but not everything needs to be overly complicated. For me, there's going to be enough going on in this mission that by simply making the Blood Angels deploy first and then the Tyranids, it helps simulate the feeling of the invasion. And to compound this, I'm going to make it a pincer attack by the Tyranid forces too, by arranging the deployment zones to look like the Blood Angels are beset on all sides. Here's the deployment map. Next, who should get the first turn? Well, normally in a situation like this, I would put that choice with the player who set up first to help balance out the disadvantage of being out deployed, which means it would be the Blood Angels player. But thinking about the narrative, I want to paint a scene of the Tyranids racing across open ground and assaulting the Blood Angels line. And to get there, I need to give the first turn to the Tyranids. Now, this gives them an advantage. They out deploy the Blood Angels and they also get to go first. But as long as we are aware of this as designers, we can try and balance out this advantage with some of the other mechanics we're going to introduce. Right, so there's the deployment and the first turn decided. Now we need to design the bulk of the mechanics. How does either side win and what special rules are in effect? What I wanted was 2 things. A battle with no objective markers. This is a personal choice. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty tired of standing on circles nowadays. And because I used the Leviathan mission deck for the first phase, literally every battle in the campaign will have been standing on circles up to this point. So I wanted victory conditions that weren't that. And secondly, I wanted this battle to have some big epic moments in it, befitting its position as the final battle in a campaign. So what I decided was the players can gain victory points in 3 different ways: crippling enemy units, destroying enemy units, and capturing table quarters. So here are the victory conditions. I am quite fond of a kill point mission nowadays, perhaps because I'm so tired of objective markers. The downside is they don't promote much maneuverability on the battlefield. So by adding this Clence style capturing of table quarters on top, it promotes movement around the battlefield too. I also offset the capturing of table quarters to the second battle round. I did this to give both players a chance to take a turn and establish a presence in all 4 quarters before scoring starts. Now the Tyranids have a slight disadvantage with these victory conditions in that if they use their reinforcement points, they give the Blood Angels player a bigger pool of victory points to score from when crippling and destroying enemy units. But this was deliberate. This is added in to offset the advantage I mentioned earlier on that they get from both deploying second and taking the first turn. Now let's get on to the final part, which is designing the mechanics to create those big, epic narrative moments that I want. To inject those big narrative moments, I created a table that the loser would roll on each battle round with a range of effects from nothing to quite spicy. The Blood Angels player might get some models returning to their depleted units, while the Tyranid player can get live biomorphs happening on the battlefield. What I like about a system like this is it has a strong negative feedback loop. Like the items in Mario Kart, it gives the loser a chance at coming back into the game in a big way, but the randomness means that a player cannot submarine to guarantee it. I speak more on positive and negative feedback loops in my video on Spearhead, which I recommend you watch if you want to learn more about them. Both have their place, and I don't think I would put a strong negative feedback loop into, say, a tournament-focused mission. But here, this is the finale of a 5-battle campaign, something that will have likely taken the players a month to play through, so the worst finish would be a final battle where one player runs away with the victory. Another reason to add this is due to the rest of the mechanics we've introduced during the campaign. There are lots of moving parts that could impact the balance. We have all the different rewards from the battles in the lead up. One player could have won 4 or 5 of these battles potentially and be armed to the teeth with rewards. Perhaps the Tyranid player has created a truly horrible Frankenstein's monster through adding all the biomorphs onto one unit. These are all unknowns, and in a case like this, a negative feedback loop can act as a safety net to your design, helping balance out the system by giving the loser a chance to get back into the game. So there's the final battle designed, which will hopefully give an epic send-off to this campaign. Okay, now it's time to create the final PDF, so we're going to be opening up Affinity. How I'm going to present this is a series of escalating steps that will get progressively more difficult. I think you should definitely do the first steps, but as they do get more difficult, you will need to decide if you want to enact them or not. Alright, let's start with the simplest of steps first. Step 1. Proper formatting. Create a new document in Affinity. I am going to set the pages to 10 rather than 8, as that will give us a front cover and a back cover either side of our 4 spreads. I'm using the standard settings, A4 in size, and I'm setting the color profile to CYMK. This is an important one. There are 2 color profiles used, RGB and CYMK. RGB is for web design and has slightly more vibrant colors. However, printing houses will only accept CYMK, so learn to use it as default. You don't need the super bright colors anyway. Alright, step 2. Fonts. Don't overthink these. You will only need 2 or 3 fonts in total. You'll need a font for the body text, a font for your titles and headers, and optionally a font to denote keywords. For the body text, my advice is just use Georgia. It's a font that comes pre-installed on your computer. It may surprise you, this is the official font for Dungeons & Dragons. Open any D&D book, it's all Georgia. Not just the body text, but the headers and titles too. If they can get away with using a stock font, so can you. For the other fonts, I'm going to pop over to fontsquirrel.com. FontSquirrel doesn't have a big selection as something like Dafont, but these are all commercially free. I chose something called Unifractor Magentia 21 for my titles and headers font. It is a Gothic script, so suits the medieval vibe of Warhammer 40,000. For my keyword bold font, I select Fira Code, which looks more futuristic but in a 1980s 8-bit sort of way, so suits the other vibe of 40k, which is retro sci-fi. Right, with those 2 steps, the document already looks pretty good, and this was one thing that struck a chord with me when looking at the playtest rules for Trench Crusade. Here too is just proper formatting. They've chosen a very thematic font for the headers, and they've added a splash of color which really helps set the mood. So we could just stop there, but actually steps 3 and 4 are really easy to do as well, and they're going to really elevate the look and feel of your design. Step 3. Page texturing. Open up any Warhammer book, any D&D book, or dare say any game book made in the last 10 years, and you're going to see the pages are textured. You don't need to source these off the web. Did you know it's really easy to make your own? Right, I'm going to switch over to Procreate for this step, but you could achieve similar results in the pixel mode of Affinity. So I create a blank CYMK document with the dimensions of an A3 page, as when page texturing, you should be thinking about spreads. What's great about creating your own page textures is you can choose a color palette that fits the mood of your rules. My campaign is about Tyranids, so I'm going to use purple colors for my texturing. Before you begin, set your background color to an off-white that will match. I'm going for this cool grey, and now I'm adding texture, building it up around the edges of the page and the centerfold. I am using stock Procreate brushes here with no modifications. The 3 brushes I'm using are Tyranid, Wasteland, Heavy Metal. And the trick here is to use them not just as a brush, but as your eraser too. I keep going back and forth with the brush and the eraser, building up and softening it out until I'm happy with the finished result. Once we apply that to our page, we can see how great it looks. But don't stop there, the next step is really easy too. Step 4, dark pages. So far, all the pages are what I'm going to refer to as light pages. They are on an off-white background with black text. The next step is to create dark pages. That is a near black background with white text. To do this, I draw a new layer in the same file in Procreate. The brush I'm using this time is called Nico Rull, which is this great grungy chalk-like brush. Rather than using black, I use a very dark purple, and then I cover the spread with this brush, but I do so quite roughly so that bits of texture start to appear. I then duplicate that layer and splice it left and right. This now gives me 4 different types of spread: a light spread, a dark spread, a light dark spread, and a dark light spread. I apply this to my document, and whenever the text falls on a dark page, I turn it white. So these are the 4 steps I would recommend everyone does. It has really elevated the document in my opinion and given it a professional look, and it was all so easy to do. I have one more step, and this is more of an advanced step. Step 5, vector icons. This final step uses the vector mode on Affinity, and we're going to use it to create custom icons. I created all these icons using it. Real quick, if you don't know what a vector image is, it is an image made of points and curves rather than pixels. This means it can scale infinitely to any size and will never get distorted, unlike a regular image made of pixels. And this tool is great for making icons for factions or for mechanics and abilities. Whenever you see little icons in a game book, for example these icons here, they have been made using a vector tool. I love them because they look cool and they are a great way of signposting specific rules. Here, Affinity is not just an equivalent of Adobe Illustrator in this regard. In my opinion, it is the better tool, and one of the reasons is it comes with loads of shapes to get you started. These preset shapes are super customizable, using the options on the toolbar and these orange nodes. Now, when it comes to designing complex vectors, for example, I designed this custom Tyranid style icon for myself. When it comes to designs like this, my suggestion is to sketch it out and to use Symmetry. So I went over to Procreate first and sketched it out, and like I said, I'm not a very skilled artist, I'm learning currently. The secret sauce, in my opinion, is using the symmetrical tool. Your designs will look so much better when they are symmetrical. With the sketch done, I import it over to Affinity, and again, Symmetry is your friend. Rather than painstakingly creating the entire thing in vector shapes, I simply create half of it and then duplicate it, flip it, and voila. But to begin with, your vectors don't need to be this complex. I created vector icons for all the planets just using simple shapes. Okay, so those are 5 steps that can apply to any game book, and I think you should definitely always do the first 4 steps because they're relatively easy to do. And then once you're up to the challenge, you should try tackling the vector icons as well. Final thing I did was create a series of planet images that I could use as illustrations in my campaign. Now I'm just going to give a rough overview as to how I made these rather than a detailed step-by-step. And that's because the planets will only be useful if you too are making a campaign that focuses on fighting over different planets. The beauty of the 3 location dilemma is that the locations can be anything. They might be districts of a city, or they might be rooms inside a dungeon. But the idea I want to convey still is that even if you don't have exceptional art skills, like me, you can create striking imagery for your book through using photo manipulation. This is something that the game Morkborg does exceptionally well. It takes stock imagery, things like old artwork that's in the public domain, or this image of a human heart, and it manipulates them and makes them part of the design. So real quick, I took free satellite imagery of places like Australia. I used the mesh warp tool to turn them into spheres. I created a shadow by layering some black towards the bottom, using the multiply blending mode and dropping the opacity. I then created some light at the top by layering some white and using the overlay blending mode, again dropping the opacity. I added a few finishing touches such as stock imagery of a lens flare and a blue corona using blending options. On some planets I added clouds, and to do this I used this NASA cloud map. I took a portion of it and I used the same sphering trick before layering it on top, and then I placed these planets onto an image of space. I got addicted to this and I made loads of them before picking the ones that came out nicest. And once you take these planets and add on some of the vectors we made, you get some really cool looking illustrations. And I went to town using these. I created a map of the subsystem to go on the first page. I used them to create a visually exciting location spread. I zoomed in on one to use as a bit of artwork, and then I blew up one real big on the final spread to give the final battle an epic feel. So that brings us to the finished PDF. Let's just roll through the pages quickly to take a look at the finished thing. I hope this has shown you how you can create a professional looking design, even if, like me, you don't have any substantial art skills to speak of. It might be daunting, but these are great skills to learn, and the tools for making them are the most accessible they have ever been, making this the perfect time to learn. Once you create a finished piece like this, it feels a lot more real. This is now a game that people can interact with, and it's my recommendation that you start making completed projects like this if you either want to be an independent creator or you want to build up a portfolio to showcase your designs and land you a job in a big studio. So that brings us to the end of this video, and wow, it was a long one. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me, and let me know down in the comments if you found the video useful. And that wraps up my Games Design 101 series. Over the course of these videos, we looked at the very core of games design, and that is how to design meaningful choice. We turned that meaningful choice into a simple framework that you could build a 2-player narrative campaign out of. And then we've drafted up several of those campaigns and we've turned one into a finished piece, including a full PDF full of fancy graphics ready to be downloaded and played by players. You can download the finished PDF of my campaign, Shadows over Ornamentum, from my itch.io page that I've linked down in the description. This can serve as a great reference when designing your own campaign, and also if you and a friend have the two armies, Blood Angels and Tyranids, and you give the campaign a go, please let me know. I'd love to hear how you got on. Now, this video in particular was actually really intensive for me to make. As much as I'm trying to teach you guys something, I was also learning a lot myself in the process as well, especially when it comes to making a finished PDF. As you might recall in some of the earlier videos, I said that I'm working on my own fantasy narrative skirmish game at the moment, and as we move into the new year, I hope to showcase that more and more on the channel. So there's a lot of exciting videos to come. If you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. It really helps out the channel. Please consider liking this video and giving it a hype as well. Let me know down in the comments below what else you would like to see from SPGD. Otherwise, until next time, bye for now.